to start in 1774, November 1774, when Edmund Burke, the Member of Parliament for Bristol, said to the electors of Bristol, look, you have elected me as your member in Westminster, but I'm not there to take your instructions. I'm there to use my brain to try to think through issues and act in your best interests. That's why I think the referendum of a couple of years ago was the biggest giant con trick in British political history. It was completely fraudulent, and for Theresa May to keep on saying, and other politicians do, including I think Corbyn, that we have to comply with the operation of democracy. Or May is even recently saying, I wish to obey the instructions of the people. I do wish they'd go back and read Edmund Burke's famous speech to the electors of Bristol in November 1774. So my argument is going to be about what I call the absurdity of Brexit, the notion that it was a giant, a fraudulent con trick, which and so that it's that is therefore no surprise that the British parliamentary system has been paralysed by it. Here are the reasons for the contract. First of all, a huge dragon, which Stephen Fry calls fear, was erected with the compliance of the appalling British tabloids. The fear was said that strangers were going to invade the country, even that the European Union had plans to integrate the United Kingdom with France. And of course there was the repeated plea that Britain could no longer be a sovereign democracy, all of its rights would be eroded. So there's the dragon of fear. Then this was ably supported by deceit and lying, in which the major leader of the deceit and lying group was Boris Johnson, the former Lord Mayor of London, former Foreign Secretary, who rode around in a red bus which had the slogan about £350,000 per week. 350 million, sorry, yes, per week being returned to the National Health Service. It was to be rejuvenated. He also claimed many times that British democracy wouldn't be possible if we stayed being members of the European Union, even though over the previous 5 years, 95% of the laws passed by the European Union had been supported by the British government. And being Boris Johnson, of course, he had to go into all sorts of other absurd, entertaining claims, because his main occupation is to be a permanent clown in British public life. So that there's one speech you could watch in which he says that in future, if we retreated from the European Union, we could eat deformed bananas, whereas previously, under the appalling controls of the European Union, the bananas had to be in a certain shape. He also, at one point, I don't think it was in Grimsby though, said that there was a danger that condoms would erode British manhood because the European Union had plans to reduce the size of them. You could see Then there's the race card, that was played so strongly, not only by the tabloids, but the man who goes by the appalling name of Nigel Farage, in whose DNA there is a kind of Faragio of lying. You will remember the infamous picture of hordes of people with the only white person having their face blocked out, trying to get into Britain. What the photographer and Nigel Farage forgot was that there's the biggest wall imaginable around the south coast of Britain, which President Trump would be envious of, except that it's called the English Channel. In other words, it's almost impossible or incredibly difficult. You only have to watch the sad, almost nightly pictures of people in camps in Calais trying to board trucks to gain entry to Britain to know how difficult it is. But the Farage, alongside with the aid of the British tabloids, claimed this notion about the invasion of Britain, strangers in our midst. And there were some classic pamphlets showing that, or claiming that 15 million Turks were going to suddenly arrive in Britain because Turkey was about to become a member of the European Union. In fact, Turkey had been trying for 13 years, I think 13, maybe 13, unsuccessfully to join the Union. And then the next pamphlet shows Iraq and Syria joined with almost in the same colours with Turkey, also trying to allow their citizens to enter Britain, even though Iraq and Syria have never even applied to join the European Union. So the race card was played incredibly, were repeated, which is another point of my argument about the massive fraud. Then there was then we come to the notion that the Leave campaigners were in favour of the common man against the establishment. It was the same sort of argument which if you look at what went on in the campaign to elect Trump, that the ordinary person who had been neglected would be supported by voting to leave. And yet the leader, or the leaders of the Leave campaign, the leaders of the anti-establishment, were 3 public schoolboys born into the establishment, in particular Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg. Now, Jacob Rees-Mogg was somebody who thinks that the 2/3 of the world should still be coloured pink. When I was a child, if you opened the atlas, 2/3 of the world were coloured pink. It was called the British Empire, of which you colonials were a part. So here is Jacob Rees-Mogg. Look at his credentials. He's in favour of fox hunting. He's against abortion of any kind, and he once produced a petition to the Daily Express that said all overseas aid should be abolished, that it was rather pointless. Then we come to the suspicion that which Jake may confirm, that a large amount of the money to support the Leave campaign came from Vladimir Putin, or at least indirectly from Russia. I mean, the Leave campaign has already been fined and reported to the police for illegal practices in their campaign. But I think the person who gave a billionaire called Aaron Banks, is that right?
Aaron.
Was made the biggest donation ever to the Leave campaign, and it looks as though he was carefully funded by Putin and Russia. Let me come now to something that's pretty close to my heart, because when Edward Heath was the Prime Minister of Britain, I campaigned for Britain to enter the European Union on the grounds that there should be peace in Europe. That was the platform, because the European countries had been the source of appalling carnage over centuries. So that was the argument to join, for many of us, to join the European Union. Not about free trade, not about free movement of peoples, not about a common currency, but about the significance of peace in Europe.
Globalisation.
And you can see too that in some ways that was recognised, because in 2010 I don't think this was ever mentioned in the campaign, although I wasn't there. In 2010 the European Union won the Nobel Prize for Peace. So that peace platform is hardly mentioned. The benefits of recognising the interdependence of people, a sort of rerun of John Donne's 16th poem, "No man is an island, every person is a part of the main." But that seems to be conveniently forgotten in the grovelling about tactics, where principles have nothing to do with the argument. It's also worth remembering that in the peace platform that the anthem of the European Union is taken from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Peace Symphony. in which the lyrics in the final movement are taken from the German poet Schiller's famous, wonderful poem called Ode to Joy, in which Schiller said he wanted that poem to be a kiss for the whole earth. And Beethoven said of that Peace Symphony, which is a gigantic leap from the first 8 symphonies to the 9th, that he wanted it heard outside beyond the concert platform and around Europe and around the world. So that brings me back to the argument that it was a giant fraud, a fraud on the grounds of lying, of deceit, of obvious racism, and a return really to just remember the claims of Edmund Burke in 1774 that you weren't elected to the Parliament merely to take instructions from the people. Okay, no, 2 minutes, I'll take no more. Final point, and there's always a danger when an elderly academic keeps on saying a final point. You know, 10 minutes later, they're still there. The final point. Look, Theresa May keeps on being defeated. I mean, this mediocre woman, she has the obstinacy of an overloaded Mexican donkey. If you've ever been there and watched, did you find that offensive? Gotta go. To the donkey. Look, she keeps on being defeated, massively defeated in the House of Commons, but she's allowed to come back time and time again. But nobody said, can we, except maybe with the people's vote argument, can we please reconsider the absurdity of that referendum and the giant conflict that occurred? Last example, finally, Mary. My wife and I landed in Britain on the day when the result was announced. The following day, the question most asked on the social media was, what is the European Union? That's my